Welcome to Business Agility Now, the podcast powered by Scaled Agile. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. This is the place to get advice, stories, and perspectives to help you work differently and build the future. Thanks for listening and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. All right, we're hanging out here today with Mike from LSA Digital. When you started in this space, were you focused on like process, governance, BizArc, things like that? Or like what really brought you into this lovely domain that we all call home?
Yeah, so I started off in business process design, and specifically model-based process design that is enhanced by software to allow different kinds of folks come to the table and electronically model processes from their desk. And the thing is, model-based systems engineering is not a new concept, but it is a highly technical concept typically reserved for engineers and folks that are doing technical designs. We have to find ways to make it so tools and process design and solution design are easier to bring people together for better sync. So that's where I started, and I've kind of weaved that throughout my career as I've said, process design is important, but so is getting to the point and delivering smaller chunks of results and outcomes. And so is enterprise architecture, things like standards and governance in organizations. But again, this agility thing advises us to not centralize everything, don't overdo it, but lay out just enough architectural runway. So the Scaled Agile framework became this very natural set of practices that sort of took my specialties in business process design and enterprise architecture and helped actually make them effective for faster, higher quality delivery value. And then I started adding on IT service management later in my career, especially with ServiceNow, thinking about how can we do this, deliver those IT services, but think about the life cycle, the full life cycle of them. Because I think I've talked to you before, Adam, and we've talked about how digital transformation, it can't be treated as this one and done. Right? And so much of the time, folks forget about, hey, wait a minute. When all the consultants leave, we've got to deliver effective services to our customers and to our employees. And that's what I mean by the word life cycle, right?
100%. You know, I like that you said that. And I know we talked about it before. One of the big things I'm pushing for in our space and in the words that we use in the language is to completely remove the word transformation from how we talk about things. I mean, I've been in IT for 24 years. And ever since my first day here on the job, we've been talking about transformation. And you know what? I'm tired. We've been transforming forever. Like, when are we going to be transformed so that we can just be resilient and focus on continuous learning and improvement? And that's what I'm really starting to push our community towards. Like, we need to stop saying we're transforming, because transformations imply a beginning and an end in a new normal state. And there is no new normal state. The new normal is that we're constantly changing and constantly evolving. And, you know, you think of like an IT services landscape. I mean, right, when you evolve architectures and change and you transform, by the time you're done transforming, you got to do it again because everything's changed. So I think if we can start shifting people from this idea of transformation to something like a continuous evolution, that's more accurate to describe where we're at now. And to embrace that, we need to have different ways of working and different ways of thinking. Because I think like a lot of our old architecture and everything was basically built on top of philosophies that said, hey, it's, you know, post World War II, let's create a 50-year strategic plan. Dude, if I came to you, Mike, and I was like, Mike, here's my company, and here's a 50-year strategic plan. You can give me any money? No way. You're going to think I'm crazy.
Yeah, we've got to be able to respond and adapt. And this is the thing about, we talk about lean portfolio management. We talk about breaking work and initiative into smaller chunks frequently. But, you know, the folks who are working on the lean portfolio business cases and trying to take that advice, because these are folks who have been up through Agile and they kind of understand the concepts. They've got to work with enterprise architects and IT folks who are not bought in to the concept of small chunks. And so there tends to be a lot of misunderstanding in terms of how the enterprise architects and the technology folks advise the lean portfolio folks to say, all right, how can we do that? How can we make this big investment, but how can we do it with lower risk and smaller chunks? It's a real art.
The language I try and push folks to use is experiment. And when you really shift a portfolio and how they think, what you're really trying to do is shift them from a big upfront plan and a big upfront investment, and it's only done when it's done, to one that says, we're going to do just enough to run a test. And I know from my early days as an architect, that freaked me out, because all I heard when you talk about tests, we're going to build something, we're going to, give it a shot, all I heard was technical debt. Because we're going to build it, we're going to test it, it fails, and then what? Are you going to unwind it? What are we going to do? So I think when we start understanding, well, for one, when we can have cleaner architecture and it can be more modular, and to run an experiment doesn't mean we're baking something in forever because it's hard-coded and never changing. We can become more adaptable, but it comes to the idea that you have to architect for the future that you want. If you want to be able to move fast and experiment, you can't just do it based on your old monolithic architecture. You've got to build a system that allows you to experiment, test, and roll back without incurring more debt or spending more money. And I think when I talk to a lot of leaders, I mean, we still have this very toxic business and IT dynamic. It's all the same, right? If you're telling me as a business leader you want to move faster, well, then you have to understand what needs to change in your ecosystem to allow you to move faster. And I guess like that's the idea of like a digital environment is there's no us and them, it's we. And I think it's a really powerful position, but there's a lot of history and feelings to overcome to get there.
Well, I like that you said that. And, we've been in this, and you and I have been in this industry in a long time, and we've talked about the business versus IT, trying to break that down, trying to get them to come together. And I tell you, one of the things we used to talk about a lot is in the industry is the IT operating model. And I said, okay, enough. We're not calling it an IT operating model anymore. It is a digital operating model. And it is, and when we approach that, we call it, we very specifically bake agility into the digital operating model from the beginning, right? So it's not that IT is just this thing to support business, that it's literally that we're in it together to produce these digital services for our employees, for our customers. That's the focus. And when I opened up and we discussed the digital formula, it's literally a pyramid at the end that says, hey, there's business services on top, and it's supported by effective, reliable, secure IT services. And this is why we bring in things like ITSM in this conversation, is because a lot of organizations, especially in government where we work a lot, are not really service oriented. Not really thinking like that, like in terms of how first thing we do is talk about building a service catalog, right? And a service portfolio to say, hey, where do you want to go with your services? What do you want to provide better? And then take that picture, and that becomes guidance for all the things we have to do to get there in terms of the blockage we have to remove, the skills we have to develop, help the organization develop, because there's, and I know you've probably seen this as well. In many organizations, there's a lot of superstar syndrome still. Right?
Did you ever read The Phoenix Project?
I did not.
Okay,
I've heard great
so
things.
in The Phoenix Project, there's a guy, his name is Brent. And he's that guy. He is too important to go on vacation, too important if you got hit by a car, the company's done. And I mean, you're right. You have that superstar syndrome where it's a blessing and a curse to that person because they like to be that person, but they also hate to be that person. But I think every older organization with a lot of debt has that person. So, like with that in mind, how do you start the conversation with, say, a government agency that in 2024 is still running backup tapes at night, and we need to modernize that? And I think very specifically of like the SSA. So they have their master earnings file that is everything that every single one of us have. Do you know how like the SSA IRS dynamic works? So when you issue your W-2s at the end of the year, it doesn't go to the IRS. As an employer, we submit it to the SSA. And the SSA has the responsibility for error checking every W-2 that comes in. They update the master earnings file, which is their record, your record of every dime you've ever earned, so they can at some point determine a retirement for you. And then SSA passes that earnings file to the IRS. And that master earnings file goes back to the 1930s. Literally everything everyone's made since the 1930s. And they also have the responsibility for maintaining like the national death registry. So when someone passes away, the SSA is among the first to know. So they close your earnings file, they alert the IRS and the rest of the government. And all of that going back to the 1930s to present, almost 100 years, is stored on tape. And it's slow, monolithic architecture. I mean, can you imagine? So what needs to happen, right, is we need to update all of that. They have, in Woodlawn up the street, the campus is massive. The vast majority of the campus is the data center that stores all of this. And the way the building is built is like the center of the building has all of these old servers and all of these old tapes. And that's that. I mean, it's 2024. That's how they're still running. Now, so if you walk in there and you talk to them about what we can all recognize they need to do, which is get rid of those tapes, get rid of those servers, and move to a modern architecture, like how do you even start that conversation with a group of people that are still changing tapes?
The first thing I would do is try to understand the root cause, because I'm betting there are a lot of folks in there that are reasonable humans that do live in the real world, have iPhones, and probably look around and say, this is ridiculous. So the first thing I try to do is identify with them and say, I feel your pain. I can understand why you're frustrated when you come to work every day. And we think about the blockers. What are the policies that are in place that are constraining them, handcuffing them? What is leadership holding on to? What is the risk? What is in it for them to be able to modernize and convert? As soon as we can think about digital transformation of this small thing, maybe it's not small, but coming off tapes into more of a more effective digital approach, we got to start with those things that are handcuffing them and advising them to say, how can we take this one step at a time? Or if we can't do that, if the policy is no touch, which sometimes it is, sometimes it's literally acts of Congress, right? We got to think about other ways that we can, at the ground level, minimize the impact of that. So can we maybe experiment with other ways of managing these records and kind of show what the difference looks like to policymakers, right? And so top down, bottom up, the approaches differ based on the context.
Sure. You know, I think through this problem at night because sometimes I have nothing better to do. And if you think about cloud migration from where they're at to where they should be, it's a multi-step process because you got to get it off of the tape onto something that you can migrate. And you've got to convert it from, I don't even know what the data structure would be for something like that, to something that you could migrate. I mean, it's obviously I don't know, but I would assume that the reason why that isn't happening fast is because it is so much work, right? And that's like, you think of like tapes, you can't even throw AI at that because it's manual, it's physical. Like to migrate that, you have to change tapes and convert data.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the archives are probably, there are retention laws that say this information has to stay around for X years.
Or maybe forever because
Maybe
the law
forever.
was written before we had the volume of data we do today.
But that's what I mean, is we generally got to understand what those underlying policies are, what we can and cannot do in terms of being able to figure out where the most juice for the squeeze is. And that's going to be on generally the more recent records and how we can maybe split those off as a smaller experiment and say, okay, look guys, if we were able to not do the hot records, the ones for living people that are filing taxes, if we could not do that on tape, we'd be able to file taxes a lot faster and maybe even catch fraud faster because AI could then access that information more effectively in RDBMS instead of on tape.
I mean, maybe it's even a hot cutover where you say, okay, this point forward, we're moving to this new data structure. Well, and you think about it, like everything that comes in from your tax filing people, it's digital anyway, right? So like they have to do something to take your TurboTax file and convert to their old data structure so they can put it on tape. So you would think to say, all right, let's just start today working in a new architecture. And from point forward, everything goes to the new architecture. Everything goes to the cloud or wherever we want to put it. And then in parallel, you can just have like this whole remediation effort where you're converting and restoring historical records?
From an enterprise architecture perspective, that approach, we generally call that a strangler pattern, where we say, hey, let's take some old technology. Usually we talk about mainframes. In this case, maybe mainframes processing tape. And we say, how do we modernize this one bit at a time and eventually strangle the old system to death, right? And of course, that's a priority-based conversation that says tackle X parts X, Y, and Z up front so we can get higher value up front faster, especially value that is visible to those policymakers who don't understand that this is a priority.
Do you think in a context like that, and I mean, this is non-SSA specific, but just take any big organization, I wonder sometimes if there's not a fear component for the humans, because like, let's just say that in that organization, there's, I don't know, 1,000 people running that operation. And then the cloud migration's done. In that example of like a government agency, you can't just, those people just don't go away. So what do you do? And I often try to think through the layers of that problem, right? Because there's a lot of reasons why you should. There's a lot of big scary things about, well, maybe why I don't start today. And it's just, it's crazy to think about. And I mean, is that the sort of stuff that you guys do at LSA? I mean, so talk to me about LSA.
Yeah, Lean Scaled Architects is LSA. We rebranded as LSA Digital because every time I used to say Lean Scaled Architects, they think we're designing buildings.
Yeah.
Not the case. You do not want me designing where you live. but IT systems, yes.
I don't know, Mike. I think you'd do it all right. Like I'll tell you what, if you built my house, I can guarantee it would be done correctly and structurally sound.
Oh yeah. For sure I can overdo it as an architect by birth, for sure, and blood. I get it. But yeah, I mean, LSA Digital, I mean, we started off with my own enterprise architecture and process background, as I kind of mentioned before. And we started bringing in those real experts from other perspectives. I've got Larry Marine for user experience. He wrote a book on it called Disruptive Research. We've got folks like Danny Lynn, who's our Agility at Scale director, with a lot of experience in government. And we've got other folks, my director for process, working in commercial and government. So the idea is we take all these experts and we say, how do we build a digital operating model, as I discussed before, that is really focused on solving those most important problems first, that are that are causing our digital services to be ineffective, whether they are not high quality enough or whether they're not coming out fast enough, right? Not high quality can mean, of course, they're not usable by customers, but it can also mean they're not secure. And so one of the other things that we talk about in the digital formula, one of the elements is called literally secure UX, because I'll tell you a little secret. The most secure computer in the world is one that is unplugged. Not terribly usable, but it is secure. And so that extreme example is intended to make us think about security and user experience in a continuum.
PIplanning.io. If you know, you know. If you don't know, well, go check out YouTube. But you'll have that little jingle in your head the rest of the day. You're welcome. Today's episode is powered by PIplanning.io, the go-to solution for your PI planning needs. Struggling with remote planning sessions? PIplanning.io brings your team together wherever they are. It's user-friendly, incredibly effective, and makes complex planning a breeze by providing a real-time collaborative environment and seamlessly syncing planning results back to your ALM of choice. If you've ever had to do this sync manually like I have, you know how powerful this feature is and how much time it saves you. Elevate your Agile game with PIplanning.io. Plan smarter, deliver faster. Check it out today at PIplanning.io. Now back to the show. I think people underestimate the importance of security, right? Because we can all say at a top level, oh, the worst thing that can happen to a business is to be on the front page of the journal because of a data breach. I mean, that's not inaccurate, but it's also not wholly true.
I can tell you it depends on context, because when I've worked in banking, security won every single time. They won these arguments, and the user experience people throw their hands up like, well, I guess no one's going to be able to use this very effectively, or but on the other hand, in organizations that are need to move faster, get products out the door, don't have as much of a security posture don't take it as seriously, then the user experience folks are winning, people are able to use it, but it might not be as secure. So this is why we have to think of it as a continuum. And the worst thing is the symptom of this not going well is the developers are developing, ready to release. The security people come in and say, no, you're not releasing. This is not approved. Well, where were you 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago why didn't you shift left with me?
Well, and you can replace security with literally any other component of architecture. I think people sometimes have an inaccurate picture, right? They think that one person that designs the system, and it's not. It's a community. It's. I mean, from my perspective, you've got like the experience architects, and experience architecture is a discipline I get really excited about because it's really where you can design an experience that's elegant while also being secure because we're doing it together. And that's the trick right there. Like all of the architectural components need to be planned. It's some varying degree of what I visualize as guardrails, right? The closer we get to the solution, the more narrow the guardrails get. But we need to be thinking as a community because it's not just business process design. It's not just IT services design. It's data. It's security. It's all of the things.
We're getting right at the heart of how we solve the root cause of this problem.
Tell me about it.
That is collaboration and context. So we talk about the security architects. We talk about the folks who are concerned with safety and financial compliance. And we talk about the developers and the UX people and the process experts. They need to collaborate more effectively. In fact, according to safe principle number 7, we need better cross-domain and sync, right? Better cross-domain sync doesn't just happen because you put a bunch of people in a room. Generally, when you throw a bunch of people in a room and say work it out, there's a lot of time wasted. People walk out of the room and say, why was I in that meeting? No one even talked to me, right? How can we better prepare for meetings that have to have face time? How do we have better connection and collaboration and negotiation between security architects and UX architects, right? That is a big problem that we solve when we take a model-based approach. And I think we previously talked about model-based system engineering being this perceived as this thing that's only for engineers designing missiles and tractors, for example. But no, what we want to do is think about how we make modeling more simple to use and understand by all of these folks involved in design. Take a more simple model-based approach, analyze processes that are connected to application technology design objects and data objects and risk objects. And when we can do all those things holistically together in an integrated design, then we can have a better shared understanding before we walk into a meeting times 10, right? And maybe have 7 meetings that are higher quality. And all of a sudden, what we're doing is we're communicating, and the end effect is we're releasing products that have security, safety, all the other NFRs, non-functional requirements built in at the same time as being usable.
It always comes back to people, right? So like you talk about that room that you walk into that you get tossed into.
That's it.
Without clarity of purpose and without intent, nothing gets done. Without modeling the behavior, no pun intended, but without modeling the behavior you expect those people you put in a room to exhibit, it doesn't happen. And I see it so often. I'll start with the most effective that I've seen. So I worked with Under Armour a lot of years ago. And every quarter, Kevin Plank held a town hall, and everybody was there. And his entire leadership team was on stage with him. And you know that they don't all agree. But nobody ever saw that. They were on stage together, speaking from the same playbook, and talking about an aligned vision forward every single quarter. And that drove the entire organization to be aligned around whatever that mission was. And then you flip that. And there's other organizations that I've consulted with where you don't see any of the leaders interact ever. It's, I'm this role and this is my mission. And I'm this role and I have a competing mission from that guy because I got to beat him. And then that same siloed, intercompetitive example goes throughout the entire organization. And I don't care how well intended you are. If you put your people in that room, all they're going to do is fight because they're working for the people who are fighting and creating that system. And it's for any of this to be successful. And I'm a firm believer that your technical architecture mirrors the culture of your organization. If your technical architecture is a disaster, I'm going to guess that the social fabric of your organization probably looks pretty similar, right? If you are an organization that grows by acquisition without integration, I'm going to guess that culturally, you've got pockets of people that are probably still wearing the t-shirt from the company that they were before they were acquired and that don't really get along with other people. And I think it's just the more you think about any of these problems, it all comes back to people and individual behavior. And it's a scary thing because if you think about like AI, and I do want to ask you how you guys are using AI at LSA. But if you think about how AI is going to work really well at taking out some of the complexity from the work that we do, it's going to come down to us needing to more than ever interact as humans and communicate better and get along better and collaborate. And that's terrifying to me.
Hit the nail on the head. How do we make humans collaborate more effectively? And we all say, of course, leadership has to set the good example. Frequently, we'll be working in complex organizations that have business units that are completely running and doing their own thing. One of the more realistic approaches I like to try to take when possible is to don't start at the highest level. If they're dead set, try to start at a level that's a little bit lower on the in risk and smaller. Try to think about how we would say, hey, let's work with you. Let's actually try an experiment and let's make you the hero, director XYZ or business unit lead ABC. Give them something, put something in it for them. And then what we do is we start advising on how to model behavior, how to start forming cross-functional teams, get their folks communicating well together. And then we can hold that up as an example. So I got to tell you, this whole tipping point thing, I've not seen it work very, very, very frequently in organizations, right? What I see working is on the ground examples of seeing other teams do it, seeing my peers do it, and saying, Director ABC is really getting a lot of accolades. Like he's really doing well. And this is not a financial thing. It's just that everyone's looking at him. He's like, this guy's getting a lot done. How can I do that? Right? And then it avalanches from there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole Cotter change model, right? You start, like the way that I approach is I want to start with the smallest, most agreeable revenue center that I can get to, right? Because if it's a revenue center, it's enough on the radar that people notice it, right? Because if I just start with like that one small team over there, I mean, you can get your wins there, but it's going to be a lot slower. If you can find a mostly autonomous revenue center that's agreeable and excited, and they have a problem that you can solve, that's where you want your first win, because exactly what you're saying. So it's now we're having conversations at the level of, hey, that revenue center is doing things different. They're more efficient. Their EBITDA is higher. They're happier people. Like, what's up with that? I want to be a part of that team.
The other answer to your question on a more technical level in terms of collaboration, the word collaboration, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to use the word transformation in this answer again.
It's okay. It's appropriate sometimes, but not always.
But just so we're using familiar terminology. In order for an organization to digitally transform their business services and IT services, we have to digitally transform the way we produce those digital services, right? So all the way back from the digital operating model in the beginning, we say to the executives or the business owners, in trying to say, as you said previously, Adam, how do we get these guys to communicate together? How do we get them to collaborate? We got to think about what the outcome is, the digital services they want to provide, and how are we going to get there? So we need to start putting more effort and thought and investment into how am I going to get my teams to collaborate, avoid meetings that are wasted, avoid designing solutions that the security people come up and say, nope, you're not releasing that. Again, it all comes down to collaboration, right? And as you said, it starts by executives working closely together on such a digital operating model to begin with that's agility infused, to encourage taking risk, to encourage learning faster, fast failure, feedback, all the kinds of things we talk about in agility. Build it in upfront. And then we can apply tools like we're partner software AG. We have tools like Eris that do digital process modeling, Alphabet that is enterprise architecture. Apply them in order to have the outcomes of better collaboration, better solution design, and life cycle management of our services so that when consultants walk out the door, we've still got a way to control our tech debt.
100%.
Still got services that are running because we've got good IT service management processes and we haven't just flipped on ServiceNow and expected it to perform magic. That's what our digital operating model up front helps us to align to. And then everything else along the way, better collaboration, following those safe principles. Because I like to say I like to practice principles over practices, right? I like to really say, because there's 10 safe principles. And I tell my team all the time, I say, guys, I try to model my own behavior, and I talk about principle number 7, for example, right? And I say, how can you, in your day-to-day with our clients, say, hey, let's think about taking an economic view by thinking about the full life cycle costs of this solution this product you want to put out. Okay, maybe it's not worth it to build it that high, that much effort right now, right? And there's only 10 of them, so it's an easy thing to do.
Right. Well, and they're not hard laws, right? It's how do we apply this principle to this context the best that we can today.
Yeah.
Right. It's fluid, right? I mean, you're going to have some days where you're better than others. I'm curious, Mike, how is your team leveraging AI right now, like especially in a ServiceNow context? Like, how does that whole dynamic come together with the work that you do, the services they provide? What do those engagements look like for you guys?
I'll tell you this. Every tool partner we have in the enterprise architecture or ServiceNow or whatever it might be, Atlassian tools, those are our main partners. They've all got AI features, right? And because if you're not AI by now, you're already behind.
I mean, everyone knows a year ago, everybody was AIing. It's like, we all need a GPT and a co-pilot.
Right.
I mean, we have one too, so.
Well, of course.
Co-pilots for all.
Yes. The question is, how effectively are we using it? And how do we make it effective? So one of the examples in ServiceNow, as you mentioned. So, we frequently talk about trying to build IT service processes that allow IT service management. Help desk is the easiest example to go more effectively. So when I make a call and someone picks up the phone and I say, I've got this problem, and that person is typing in their database because they've got a little knowledge base they type on the other end, and they see no solutions for this. That person's having to invent something, having to call a bunch of people, right? And the AI engine, the little chatbot, because everyone hates that stupid chatbot, they had to go through that, didn't have an answer either. Why didn't it have an answer? Because AI is not some magical solution that's just going to solve your problems. It needs data in context of your organization and the typical problems people have using your particular technology and solutions and processes. So if that data hasn't been collected and defined and tagged in a specific way, well, the AI engine isn't going to be able to use it either.
That's how I describe it to my mom, because like she'll chat GPT a lot of stuff. And, I gotta love her for that, because the fact that she's 68 and is trying chat GPT to help run her business, I love it. And I say that not because of her age, but because my mom is not a tech forward person in any way. But I try to explain to her that, it's not this sentient being that you think of it as in your head, at least not this commercialized version. I mean, that's out there, but we're not using it commercially. I keep telling her to think about it. It's a really darn good search engine. But with that, it's only able to very quickly analyze and provide answers based on the data that it has. If it doesn't have the data, it can't help you.
Right.
Like, it's not going to just manufacture things and solve these complex problems through reason and assumption yet. But it has to have the data.
Exactly.
And I think that's a great point. Like these, magic customer service replacement bots, they're still only as good as the data that you have.
Here's the other side of it. To answer your question from the other side of it is, and I tend to take an architectural view on most things. So I've just described the data perspective and making it useful. Now I'm going to talk about the compliance perspective.
That's a scary piece.
Yeah. And I took Dr. Maynard's class and got a little badge on responsible AI. So I can talk a little bit in that context, right? But it's the same as all the other NFRs. Is it going to give you some nonsense answer, or is it going that? And if it does give you an answer, is it transparent? Do you know where it came from, right? Do you know how that answer came about? Is it ethical, right? Is it so? There's all kinds of in the micro cert for responsible AI. There's key non-functional requirements like that apply to AI, and that would be the other side of it when we're advising on how to use AI, is to think about our processes and our technology in the context of controls that enforce policies that need to be defined for AI. Right? So it's again, at a high level, it's policy, processes, controls, and technology together. How do we do this? For our previous conversation, we use collaboration techniques to model this out in a way that helps us to reuse these policies that are guidance, right? And to have controls that can be adopted, but without being overly prescriptive to the context that the solution is designed in.
Right. Well, and like that example of prescriptive is going to vary by the context, right? And we have to have that capability too. From the perspective of compliance, from the perspective of responsibility, like you can't have AI making critical decisions about somebody's life yet without some form of intervention and validation. There's a lot we could go on forever with this. So Mike, I kind of want to close out by, give a little bit of an elevator pitch for LSA. Like, when should people reach out to you? What is the biggest benefits you all provide as a firm?
Digital transformation overall, but I will say a lot of organizations already have a big digital services provider, right? There's large consultants in there. We're not trying to be the next KPMG or Deploy. What we do, or as per some of our discussion, is we have this digital formula where we really try to make collaboration more effective. We really try to encourage secure UX. We really try to take a service-oriented point of view with our ServiceNow partnership, right? And so we operate not only in a traditional, in the hot seat as a digital transformation provider, we also offer QA/rescue services to help QA existing digital transformation efforts, to help them speed up or improve the quality of their services, to clarify, or to rescue the whole thing, to say, let's look at the requirements that you originally issued in your RFPs for your existing implementers, and let's make those a little bit more outcome oriented. And I dare I say service outcome oriented. Those are some of the things we do, and we can also operate as subcontractors. So those are the ways that we add value, and we definitely like to see, from an operating model perspective, to really think about those in those services and everything in between.
I think it's so valuable, Mike. I mean, just to have the option to have somebody come in and say, hey, we've been working on this thing for a lot of years. You get myopic, right? You tend to fall in love with the problem. And just to have that fresh set of eyes come in and say, have you considered all of these other things, and here's what we see. I mean, I would think for anyone in the process of a digital services transformation that's invaluable.
Yes, and we definitely like to bring that fresh perspective and help really see by adding transparency, even in dashboards, right? From lean assessments all the way in walking the door, lean assessments, and say, here's where we think we need to improve A, B, and C. Don't just say it, track it throughout the entire digital transformation effort, and give the organization the ability to track it themselves, those metrics themselves, after you walk out the door, including when we walk out the door.
Absolutely. Mike, I love it. I always enjoy talking to you. These aren't the kind of conversations I get to have often, and I appreciate any time that I do. So thank you for making the time to hang out with us. In the show notes, we'll make sure that we link to you. We'll link to the organization. Is there anything else that you would like to mention that people should check out before we sign off?
Yeah, so we have digital assessments in UX and ServiceNow, ITSM, and so on our website. Please have a look. We have digital bits. We have our own podcast, thedigitalformula.com.
We'll link that too.
And a lot of resources we have. Happy to share and love to get into conversations about really understanding where folks' pain points are. So please reach out.
Mike, I appreciate you always. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Adam.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you hear, please refer us to your friends and colleagues and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. See you next time.